I came to the lake to bury my grief, not uncover a betrayal. This cabin was supposed to be our future, mine and Elisa's. But after she passed, I walked into silence and found something else waiting. A slow unraveling. A son with big plans that didn't include respect or memory. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I just started paying attention. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. But it was something Ethan will never forget. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the truck, the lake cabin rising before me like a photograph that time forgot. The porch still sagged a little to the left, something Elise always said gave it character. The same chime still hung by the front door, dull brass that hadn't caught a proper breeze in months. I stared at it longer than I meant to, waiting for it to move. It didn't. The key turned stiff in the lock. When the door creaked open, I caught the scent before anything else. Pine wood, faint lavender, and the ghost of her. Elise. It hit me harder than I'd prepared for. I'd been to funerals before, friends, co-workers, old neighbors, but none of them peeled me open like hers. 6 weeks. That's how long it had been since I watched her slip through my fingers in that goddamn hospital room with the beeping machines and tired nurses. 6 weeks of polite casseroles and forced condolences, of people saying things like, "She's in a better place," as if any place without her could possibly be better. Now it was just me, a half-empty duffel bag, and a grief that didn't know how to shut up. Inside, everything looked the same, but everything felt different. Her slippers still rested under the coat rack. The Afghan she crocheted during that never-ending winter in '03 was draped over the armchair by the window, its reds and golds dulled by time and too much sun. The book she'd been rereading, The Shell Seekers, always that damn book, sat spine up on the side table, dog-eared on page 211. And then, there it was. Her mug. Still on the windowsill, right where she liked it. The chipped blue ceramic one with the faded cartoon moose and the words, "Coffee first, questions later." I'd bought it as a joke on our 3rd anniversary. She made a face at it back then, called it tacky. But she drank from it every morning for 34 years straight. The afternoon light spilled through the window just right, catching the glaze and lighting up that moose like it had something to say. My throat clenched. I didn't touch the mug. Couldn't. Just seeing it there, untouched, somehow defied the finality of her being gone. It made her absence feel like a temporary mistake. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there like a man with nowhere to go. This cabin was supposed to be our retirement. Our retreat. We spent 2 decades dreaming of it while stuck in traffic or grading term papers or paying bills. We imagined slow mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, fishing at dawn, evening walks through the trees while the lake turned to glass. But dreams, I've learned, are fragile bastards. One diagnosis. One aggressive wave of cells. That's all it took to scatter everything we built into the wind. I made my way to the kitchen, one slow, deliberate step at a time, and filled the kettle. It hissed on the stove, the same one she insisted we buy even though it cost more than a used car. "Good things are worth waiting for," she'd said. I'd rolled my eyes then. Now I'd trade anything to hear her say it again. The kettle whistled and I poured the water into a mug, not her mug, and stirred in the instant coffee she hated. The bitterness didn't matter. Nothing tasted like anything these days. I stood by the counter and watched the lake shimmer through the trees. The sky was starting to bruise at the edges, late September slipping into October. Our favorite time of year. Elise always said the lake looked like it was wearing a velvet coat this time of evening. I sipped my coffee and let the silence stretch out until it felt almost bearable. Then the floor creaked. Just one groan of wood from the hallway. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. For half a second, I let myself pretend she was there, just out of sight, brushing her hair, or humming under her breath like she used to. But the hallway was empty. Of course it was. I exhaled slow, set my mug down, and walked through the cabin with the same reverence you'd show a chapel. I opened the bedroom door and stood at the threshold. Her sweater still hung on the bedpost. The lilac one with the missing button. Her nightstand had the little glass jar she used for her earrings, still holding 2 small silver studs. The bed was made, neatly, perfectly, like she might still slip beneath those covers if I left the room long enough. I sat down on her side of the bed and felt the indentation her body had carved over years of sleep. My chest ached. Not like a heart attack. No. This was something crueler. Slower. Grief, I guess. I stayed there until the light outside dimmed, and shadows claimed the corners of the room. Later, I lit a fire in the hearth. Not because it was cold, but because she would've. Then I sat in her chair, and stared at the dancing flames while the night took hold of the cabin. There were no sounds. No texts. No calls. No footsteps or laughter. Just me, the fire, and the memory of a woman who made this place feel alive. I hadn't told Ethan I was coming up here. I didn't want the obligation of pretending to be okay. He hadn't even called since the service. Just sent a brief text that read, "Hope you're doing all right." No punctuation. No follow-up. I didn't reply. Somehow, the fire cracked louder in that moment, like it agreed with me. As the embers began to fade, I whispered out loud to the quiet cabin, "I made it, babe." Just like we said. And for a flicker of a second, I swore I heard her voice in return. Not words, just the shape of her in the stillness. A presence without proof. I leaned back and let sleep take me where it could. Tomorrow, I'd unpack. Tomorrow, I'd start fixing the things we always meant to fix. Tomorrow, I'd begin the life we dreamed of, alone. But tonight, I just sat with the weight of what was gone. And the things still left unsaid. Grief doesn't work on a schedule. It doesn't punch in, doesn't punch out. It just lingers, eating your sleep, tightening your throat, waiting for quiet moments to crawl inside your chest. Some mornings, I'd wake up in the cabin and forget, for half a second, that she was gone. I'd stretch my arm across the bed expecting to feel her warmth, only to find cold sheets and silence. The quiet was cruel. But not as cruel as Ethan's absence. He wasn't at Elisa's memorial. Not even a phone call. Not even a late text saying he couldn't make it. Just silence. The night before the service, I waited by the cabin's front window, watching the long dirt road like some goddamn fool, telling myself maybe his flight got delayed, maybe he'd pull up last minute with Lily beside him and some hollow apology on his lips. Instead, my phone buzzed. One message. "Sorry, Dad. Corporate retreat this weekend. Big deal." Elise would have wanted me to take the opportunity. That line. That F******ing line. It stuck in my mind like a splinter, like it had roots. Elise would have wanted me to take the opportunity. He didn't call her mom. Not in that text. Just Elise. Like she was some distant colleague who signed his checks, not the woman who carried him through asthma attacks and SAT prep and breakups and every other stumble he made on the road to adulthood. He was always good with words, smooth, clever, always saying the right thing when eyes were on him. But I knew him. I raised him. And I knew when a sentence was polished for someone else's benefit. He sent that message for Lily's father. The same man who gave Ethan his shiny new job title and treated him like a son built from better stock. I remember the first time Ethan mentioned the guy, Robert Langdon. Private equity. Owned half a dozen tech companies, funded another 10. The kind of man who shakes your hand while checking your watch. Ethan called him Bob, like they were old college roommates. "He sees potential in me," Ethan said once, beaming over some scotch I hadn't touched. "Says I've got the instincts." I just nodded back then. Didn't say what I wanted to, which was, instincts don't raise you. Your mother did. And now she was gone. And my son, her only child, couldn't be bothered to show up and say goodbye. The day of the memorial was overcast, almost theatrically so. Clouds pressed low over the lake, heavy and gray, like they knew what the day was about. I stood by the water, clutching the little wooden urn we picked together before the chemo got real bad. Elise wanted her ashes scattered over the lake. Said it was the only place she ever felt still. I said a few words, simple ones. Honest ones. Our neighbors from town came, some old friends from her book club, even the pharmacist who always remembered her prescriptions by name. But Ethan? Nowhere. I felt it in every photograph. Every silence between speeches. Every hug from someone who looked confused when I didn't mention my son. I made my excuses, work thing, tight schedule, you know how it is, but I couldn't lie to myself. He chose them over her. That night, I sat alone on the cabin's porch, sipping weak tea from a chipped mug, and stared at the moonlight trembling across the water. The lake was still. So still it didn't look real. I used to joke with Elise that it was her second soul, calm, patient, impossibly deep. I missed her in the kind of way that makes you forget how to stand up. My spine had bent a little since she passed. I noticed it in the mirror one morning. Not a full hunch, but enough that I could feel the weight of her absence physically dragging me forward. And all I could think about was that message. Elise would have wanted me to take the opportunity. Would she have? Would she have nodded in approval while our son ignored the one woman who would have taken a bullet for him? Would she have smiled as he networked over cocktails while I scattered her ashes into the only place she ever truly loved? No. She wouldn't have wanted that. She would have wanted him to show up. Stand beside me. Speak from the heart, even if it broke him open. She would have wanted honesty. Connection. Memory. Instead, she got ambition. And I was starting to realize just how far that ambition went. Because 3 days after the memorial, he finally called. And it wasn't to apologize. It was a Wednesday. Not that days meant much anymore. I was in the garden out back, pruning the overgrown lavender Elise had planted along the edge of the path. She always said it needed to be tamed with love, like it was some wild creature that refused to be domesticated. I'd let it grow since she passed, maybe as a tribute, maybe out of neglect. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The phone rang just as I was kneeling in the dirt, hands smelling of crushed herb and damp soil. I wiped them off on my jeans, checked the screen. Ethan. I stood there staring at the name, my thumb hovering above the answer button like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Part of me didn't want to pick up. Not after what he'd done, or didn't do. Not after he let his mother go cold in the ground while he drank cocktails with Bob and shook hands in golf carts. But I answered. Dad, he said, his voice smooth as always. There was no apology in it. No grief. Just a salesman's pitch waiting to unfold. I was going to call earlier, he continued. Things have been crazy. You know how it is. I didn't reply. I just waited. I heard the memorial was beautiful, he said, like he read it off a summary someone else wrote. Lily showed me pictures. I grunted. There was a pause, just long enough to be awkward. Listen, he said, shifting gears, I wanted to talk to you about something. About the cabin. My stomach dropped, not in surprise, but in the way your body reacts to something it already saw coming. I've been talking to Lily, he went on, and we were thinking. With the market the way it is, and how underutilized the cabin is right now, it might be a smart move to transfer the deed. Early. There it was. Not even 2 minutes into the call, and he was already talking like a banker. You want the cabin? I asked, flatly. Well, he chuckled, not for us exactly. Lily had this great idea. She and her dad have been exploring investment opportunities. And we think the cabin could make an amazing Airbnb. Like, rustic chic. Grief getaway, type vibes. It's trending. Grief getaway. He actually said that. She's already talked to a couple of designers, he added, and her dad has a contractor who could. No, I said. He went quiet. The kind of quiet that's not silence, but calculation. I'm not asking for a handout, he said after a beat. We'd give you equity. A percentage. It's not for sale, I replied. Dad, you're here alone. You could stay in town, closer to people. Let the place work for you. It's not a business, I said. It's where your mother and I built something that mattered. Another pause. She'd want it to be useful. I almost laughed. Almost. Ethan, I said slowly, you didn't show up for your mother's memorial. You sent a text. And now you're calling, not to talk about her, not to ask how I'm doing, but to ask for her house. Her dream. Our dream. It's just a cabin, Dad. No, I said. It's not. He huffed, the sound sharp in my ear. I'm trying to build something too, he snapped. I don't have the luxury of sentimentality. You're retired. I'm hustling to make a future. Your future doesn't require my past, I said. Then, softer, and if it does, maybe you're not building the right thing. He didn't respond right away. I could feel the temperature of the call shift, cooling into something brittle. You've always made me feel like I wasn't enough, he said suddenly, bitterly. Nothing I did ever compared to how you talked about Mom. She never asked me to compare, I said. She just showed up. That landed. I could tell. There was a breath, a long inhale. I'm not going to argue with you, Dad, he said finally. If you're not ready, fine. But don't guilt-trip me for seeing potential where you see memory. I'm not guilt-tripping you, I said quietly. I'm just not giving away something sacred because you think it fits a trend. He muttered something under his breath. Then louder, fine. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time after, wondering what just happened. Wondering what part of him thought that would go differently. Wondering when my son stopped being my son and started treating me like a placeholder on a property title. I looked out at the lake. The wind had picked up, roughing the water into small waves. Elise would have told me to breathe, to stay centered, to remember what matters. I tried. I knelt back in the dirt, hands returning to the roots she planted, trying to bring something back to life. But a question kept echoing in my mind. When did he start believing everything had a price tag, even the things we built with love? I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there, staring at the cracks in the wooden ceiling, listening to the wind pull at the branches outside like it was trying to say something I wasn't ready to hear. Ethan's voice still echoed in my head, polished, impatient, hungry. We're thinking of using it as an Airbnb. As if this place was just a structure. Wood, glass, and potential profit margins. As if Elise and I hadn't poured ourselves into it, one late paycheck and busted knuckle at a time. I got out of bed just before dawn. Poured a cup of instant coffee I didn't even want. My bones ached, not from age, but from something deeper. The kind of ache that comes when trust rots from the inside out. I wandered through the cabin aimlessly, running my hand along the edge of the window Elise used to clean every morning. She said sunlight should always meet you clean. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Eventually, I found myself at the old desk tucked in the back room. It was Elise's space. Where she paid the bills, wrote postcards, jotted little notes on sticky paper I'd find stuck to the fridge days later. Don't forget your back pills. Leftover lasagna in freezer. Love you. Always. I hadn't opened that desk since she passed. The drawer stuck, but I tugged harder, and it gave with a groan. Inside were the usual scraps, paper clips, expired coupons, an old checkbook with the leather peeling at the corners. But tucked beneath a stack of envelopes was a thin, black notebook I didn't recognize. I opened it. And my breath caught. It was Elisa's handwriting. Tight, elegant, careful. Each page was dated and titled like she was keeping a log. But not of groceries or chores. No. This was a record. Of everything we gave Ethan. January 2008, tuition, $9,000, spring semester. September 2010, car down payment, $3,500. March 2012, credit card bailout, $1,800. July 2014, business seed money, $10,000, with note, he promised to pay us back by Christmas. Each entry was neat, matter of fact, with a little heart drawn beside it. Page after page, the same story. A loan, a gift, a bailout. Rent money during a bad quarter. Help with a lease Lily couldn't quite afford. Plane tickets. Laptop replacements. Emergency dental surgery. It went on and on. I turned to the back of the notebook. One page stopped me cold. It had only one line, written in a softer hand, as if she hesitated while writing it. We gave him everything. I hope one day he gives something back. I closed the book and sat there, frozen. Not angry. Not yet. Just, gutted. We never kept score. That was the rule. Marriage doesn't work if you treat kindness like currency. But this wasn't about marriage. This was about a son who built his future out of our sacrifices, then convinced himself he'd done it all alone. He had no idea Elise kept this record. I almost wished I didn't know either. But now that I did, I couldn't ignore it. The sheer volume of what we gave him, willingly, lovingly, only made his absence at Elisa's memorial feel heavier. More pointed. Like a knife left in the table after dinner. I ran my fingers across the cover of the notebook. There were little dents in the corners, like she'd thumbed it often. I could imagine her sitting here late at night, quietly documenting, not for reimbursement, but for truth. She never stopped believing in him. Even when I started to doubt. I placed the notebook back in the drawer, then took it out again. I stared at it for a long time, before finally tucking it under my arm and walking back into the kitchen. The sun was rising over the lake. Light spilled through the windows in that golden way she loved, catching the edges of the counter, brushing the fridge magnets, making the mug on the sill glow like it was holding fire. I opened the notebook again, flipped back to that last line. And for the first time since the memorial, I let myself speak to her. I don't think he will, Elise, I said quietly. I think he's already decided what you were worth. That day, I couldn't focus on anything else. Not the shutters that needed oiling. Not the branches that needed clearing from the driveway. I kept seeing the numbers, her handwriting, and the little hearts beside each entry. She had loved him so deeply. And he loved what we gave him. That night, I sat on the porch with the ledger in my lap, watching the lake settle into stillness. The stars came out one by one, mirrored on the water like ghost lights. It was beautiful. And it felt wrong to sit there alone. I turned the last page again, traced her words with my thumb. I hope one day he gives something back. I looked out at the water and said it out loud, so do I. But deep down, I didn't believe it anymore. I should have known they'd show up eventually. You don't ask a man for something he's not ready to give, and then just walk away. Not when you've already made plans. Not when you've already measured the drapes. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was fixing the dock Elise and I had always talked about resealing, just one of those, we'll get to it, things that never felt urgent until now. The sun was high, the lake still. Peaceful. Then I heard tires crunching gravel. I stood slowly, hand tightening around the hammer. The truck wasn't familiar, but the silhouette stepping out of the passenger seat was. Ethan. He was dressed in some sleek black zip-up that looked like it had never seen a day of manual labor in its life. Expensive sunglasses. A phone already in his hand. And then came Lily, flowy dress, neutral tones, those oversized sunglasses that made her look like she was on her way to a brunch photo shoot instead of my front porch. She waved like this was normal. "Daniel," she called, smiling like we were old friends at a reunion. I didn't wave back. Ethan trailed behind her, less enthusiasm in his step. His face held that look he wore as a teenager whenever he'd been caught lying, but still believed he could talk his way out of it. "Didn't know we were expecting visitors," I said, keeping my voice even. "Thought we'd surprise you," Ethan replied, a little too fast. I let the silence hang. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Lily stepped up onto the porch like she owned it. "We were just in the area," she said. "And I've been dying to see the cabin. Ethan talks about it all the time. It's beautiful." Her eyes scanned everything, the porch, the flower beds, the lake. Not with nostalgia. With strategy. She was seeing layout, angles, price points. "Didn't realize the area included a 2-hour detour," I muttered. Ethan stepped in. "Dad, we wanted to talk. In person." I crossed my arms. "About the cabin?" "Yes, but also, about honoring Mom." That stopped me cold. Lily nodded, placing her hand on Ethan's arm like they'd rehearsed this. "We've been thinking," she said, "this cabin meant so much to Elise. To both of you. And we want to preserve that. Keep it alive, in a way that shares her spirit." I raised an eyebrow. She continued, "We're thinking of renovating. Nothing major, just modernizing a bit. Keeping the original bones, of course. And naming it after her. The Elise Retreat. Doesn't that sound beautiful?" "Sounds like a marketing gimmick," I said flatly. She blinked. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're not trying to be disrespectful. We want to do something that honors her. And at the same time, makes sense financially. Passive income. Something sustainable. You could still come whenever you want. We just manage the listings, handle the guests." I let the silence sit for a while. Long enough to make Ethan shift his weight, long enough for Lily's smile to start cracking at the edges. "You want to turn Elisa's dream into a business," I said finally. "A weekend rental with a cute name." "It's not about profit," Ethan said, but I could hear the lie in his throat. "It's about purpose. About creating something that outlives us." I stared at him, hard. "Your mother didn't build this place to outlive us. She built it to live in. To be alive in." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Lily tried again. "Daniel, I understand this is emotional for you. But think about the good it could do. Guests finding peace here. People writing reviews about how it helped them reconnect with nature, with grief." "With grief?" I snapped. "You didn't even show up to hers." That landed like a slap. Ethan's face darkened. "Don't do that," he said quietly. "You're the one who brought her into this," I said. "We're trying to include you," he snapped. "But you're being stubborn. You don't need all this space. You're out here alone. You don't even use half of it." "I use the silence," I said. "And the memory. And the goddamn lavender she planted." He shook his head, frustrated. "You're making this emotional when it could be logical." "No," I said. "You're making this convenient when it should be sacred." That was it. Lily looked between us, lips pursed, clearly deciding whether to keep pushing or back off. Finally, she stepped forward. "We're offering to take care of this place. To bring it new life." I looked at her and said, calm as a stone, "Then start somewhere else." Ethan scoffed. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Control everything. Hold it over me. Make me feel like a guest in my own family. I stepped toward him, slow and deliberate. You are a guest. Right now. And I'd like my porch back. He stared at me, fists tight. Then he turned. Walked to the car without another word. Lily lingered a moment longer. Her voice dropped a register. He's trying, you know. No, I said. He's pitching. And I'm not buying. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing else. Just turned and walked back to the truck. I watched them drive away until the dust settled. Then I went back to the dock. And I worked until the sun dropped behind the trees, hammer in hand, pulse steady. My knuckles ached. My back throbbed. But something in me felt clean again. They came to sell me something. But I remembered what Elise used to say, real love doesn't ask for proof. Or a piece of the deed. It started small. The next morning, I swept the porch. Not because it was messy, truth be told, I hadn't cared about a few dead leaves in months, but because Elise would have. She always said the porch was like the face of the house. You don't have to paint your face, she'd joke, but at least wipe the damn crumbs off. I found the old straw broom leaning where we always kept it, behind the rain barrel, the bristles warped but still holding on. I swept slowly, letting the rhythm settle into my bones. It wasn't about the porch. It was about choosing something other than bitterness. The visit from Ethan and Lily had left something sour in the walls of this place. Like their presence had stained the air, shifted the light, made everything feel less like memory and more like possession. But I wasn't about to let them define this space. Not the way they wanted to. Not through some glossy online profile with drone footage and a 5-star cleaning fee. This cabin wasn't for customers. It was for Elise. For us. So, I started fixing things. I oiled the shutters on the lake-facing windows, the ones that always stuck on humid days. I replaced 2 warped planks on the dock, even though I had to climb into the icy water to do it. Elise used to say, "Don't wait for summer to take care of what you'll need in winter." Funny how her words echoed louder now that she was gone. I found her little garden journal under the bench on the back porch. The pages were water-stained, the ink bleeding in places, but her notes were still legible. Lavender, thyme, basil, check for aphids every Sunday. The mint wants to take over everything. Greedy little bastard. I laughed out loud reading that. She hated mint. Said it reminded her of old gum and disappointment. But she planted it anyway, because she liked how it smelled when you brushed past it. So I cleared the bed by the fence line. Dug out the dead roots and tilled the soil with the old rusted trowel she kept duct-taped at the handle. I planted new lavender and thyme. No mint this time. Just what she loved. Each evening, I'd walk the path down to the water and sit for a while. Sometimes with tea. Sometimes with nothing but my thoughts. I started talking to her. Not in the way people talk to the sky, begging for signs. No. In a quiet, steady way. Like I used to when she was folding laundry or stirring soup. I fixed the dock today. You'd be proud. It doesn't lean anymore. Your rosemary didn't survive the winter. I replaced it with new shoots. They're not as strong, but they'll get there. I told him no. He didn't take it well. It helped. It didn't erase the grief. Nothing does. But it gave it shape. It let me move it, carry it, instead of drowning in it. And the more I rebuilt, the more I realized this wasn't about revenge. Not really. I wasn't out here scheming. I wasn't stewing in anger or plotting a way to teach him a lesson. I was preserving. Restoring what mattered. Because Ethan and Lily didn't just want the cabin. They wanted to repurpose it. Rebrand it. Strip it of its meaning and turn it into an amenity. But this wasn't a product. This was Elisa's dream. I remembered the way she'd trace her finger across the floorboards after we installed them, like she was reading Braille in wood grain. "This is ours," she whispered then. "No one gave it to us. We built it." That's what they didn't understand. Ethan had grown up in comfort because we had sacrificed. He saw the cabin as an inheritance. A thing to be claimed. But for us, it was a victory. A flag planted after decades of work. That's why I kept fixing things. The shutters. The screens. The overgrown path near the boathouse. Even the stone ring around the fire pit that had sunk in places. Every repair was a conversation. A refusal. A promise. I wasn't keeping the cabin out of spite. I was keeping it because it mattered. Because some things deserve to be left untouched by the reach of people who only see potential in terms of profit. One morning, as I was clearing weeds from the gravel path, I found a small stone with Elisa's handwriting on it. It said, "Let it grow wild before you pave it." I'd forgotten she used to write little quotes on the garden stones. That one hit me hard. I set it back in the dirt like it belonged there all along. And that day, I made a decision. This wasn't going to be Ethan's legacy. This wasn't going to be rented by strangers with hashtags and weekend bags and no idea whose hands had built these walls. This was going to remain what it was, a home. A memory. A monument. And maybe, just maybe, a refuge for someone else who needed quiet. Who needed healing. Someone like me. I parked my truck on Main Street, right outside the office with the crooked shingle that read Howard and Dell, Estate Planning since 1952. It was a Tuesday, clear skies, no breeze. The kind of day that makes even the air feel honest. I hadn't walked into that office in years. Last time I was there, Elise sat beside me, clutching a folder with trembling hands and a hopeful smile. We were updating our living wills, talking about end-of-life care, burial wishes, the kind of conversations that feel too heavy until they're suddenly not heavy enough. She wanted her ashes in the lake. I followed through. But now it was my turn to finish the conversation. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. It smelled like old carpet and lemon polish. Sandra, the same receptionist with the steel gray bun and sharp penmanship, looked up and smiled gently. "Mr. Price," she said. "We weren't expecting you." "I didn't make an appointment," I replied. "Didn't want time to change my mind." She nodded and motioned me in. "I'll let Mr. Dell know." A few minutes later, I was seated across from Robert Dell, who used to mow my lawn when he was 10 and now wore cufflinks and charged $300 an hour to make people feel less nervous about death. He pushed his glasses up his nose. "What can I help you with today, Daniel?" I handed him the folder. "My will," I said. "I want to change everything." He blinked once. Then nodded. I laid it out as simply as I could. The cabin? It would go to a conservancy trust, not to Ethan. Specifically, to a local nonprofit Elise had loved, Second Horizon. They ran grief retreats for veterans, widows, and families who'd lost children. Quiet, nature-based healing. No ads. No gimmicks. Just space and stillness. I told Dell to set it up so the cabin couldn't be sold, rented, or altered. It would remain as is, Elisa's books on the shelves, her garden still tended, her mug on the windowsill if that's where someone left it. The rest of my modest estate, my pension, savings, and the little investments that had grown slowly but steadily, would go into the same foundation. Maintenance costs, staffing, transportation for people who couldn't afford the trip. The works. Ethan. I removed him entirely. Dell looked at me over his glasses, waiting. "You sure about that?" he asked, careful not to sound like he was judging. "I am," I said. This place was never meant to be a stepping stone in someone else's climb. He nodded and started typing. The sound of his keyboard filled the room like distant rain. I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching the way his brow furrowed with focus. Elise would have liked this part. She liked knowing the fine print. She believed in clarity. It took an hour to get everything documented. By the time I signed the final page, something in my chest loosened. Not joy. Not relief. Just certainty. Dell looked at me when it was done. Do you want to notify your son? No, I said. He'll find out when the time is right. He gave me a long look. He's going to be upset. I know, I said. But I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because I believe in something Elise believed in. We built that cabin as a place of healing. And healing doesn't come with a nightly rate. I walked out of the office lighter than I'd felt in months. Outside, the world looked exactly the same. Storefronts, the cafe with the old red awning, the barber's pole spinning lazily. But something inside me had shifted. A slow-turning gear had clicked into place. I stopped by the florist on the way home and bought a bundle of lavender and white lilies, Elisa's favorites. I didn't go to a grave. She didn't have one. Just the lake. So I drove to the cabin, changed into clean clothes, and walked down to the dock. The sun was starting to dip behind the pines, gold and warm, casting the water in light that shimmered like memory. I knelt at the edge, let the flowers rest on the surface. They floated for a few seconds, then drifted outward, caught by the gentle pull of the current. I whispered, "It's done, Elise. The place is yours. Forever." And for the first time since she passed, I felt like I'd actually done something right. I didn't expect to be applauded. I didn't care about being understood. This wasn't about making peace with Ethan. It was about preserving something that meant more than inheritance, more than legacy. It was about love. The real kind. The kind that stays behind, not in bloodlines, but in the places we protect. I parked my truck on Main Street, right outside the office with the crooked shingle that read Howard and Dell, Estate Planning since 1952. It was a Tuesday, clear skies, no breeze. The kind of day that makes even the air feel honest. I hadn't walked into that office in years. Last time I was there, Elise sat beside me, clutching a folder with trembling hands and a hopeful smile. We were updating our living wills, talking about end-of-life care, burial wishes, the kind of conversations that feel too heavy until they're suddenly not heavy enough. She wanted her ashes in the lake. I followed through. But now it was my turn to finish the conversation. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. It smelled like old carpet and lemon polish. Sandra, the same receptionist with the steel gray bun and sharp penmanship, looked up and smiled gently. "Mr. Price," she said. "We weren't expecting you." "I didn't make an appointment," I replied. "Didn't want time to change my mind." She nodded and motioned me in. "I'll let Mr. Dell know." A few minutes later, I was seated across from Robert Dell, who used to mow my lawn when he was 10 and now wore cufflinks and charged $300 an hour to make people feel less nervous about death. He pushed his glasses up his nose. "What can I help you with today, Daniel?" I handed him the folder. "My will," I said. "I want to change everything." He blinked once. Then nodded. I laid it out as simply as I could. The cabin? It would go to a conservancy trust, not to Ethan. Specifically, to a local nonprofit Elise had loved, Second Horizon. They ran grief retreats for veterans, widows, and families who'd lost children. Quiet, nature-based healing. No ads. No gimmicks. Just space and stillness. I told Dell to set it up so the cabin couldn't be sold, rented, or altered. It would remain as is, Elisa's books on the shelves, her garden still tended, her mug on the windowsill if that's where someone left it. The rest of my modest estate, my pension, savings, and the little investments that had grown slowly but steadily, would go into the same foundation. Maintenance costs, staffing, transportation for people who couldn't afford the trip. The works. Ethan. I removed him entirely. Dell looked at me over his glasses, waiting. You sure about that? He asked, careful not to sound like he was judging. I am, I said. This place was never meant to be a stepping stone in someone else's climb. He nodded and started typing. The sound of his keyboard filled the room like distant rain. I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching the way his brow furrowed with focus. Elise would have liked this part. She liked knowing the fine print. She believed in clarity. It took an hour to get everything documented. By the time I signed the final page, something in my chest loosened. Not joy. Not relief. Just certainty. Dell looked at me when it was done. Do you want to notify your son? No, I said. He'll find out when the time is right. He gave me a long look. He's going to be upset. I know, I said. But I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because I believe in something Elise believed in. We built that cabin as a place of healing. And healing doesn't come with a nightly rate. I walked out of the office lighter than I'd felt in months. Outside, the world looked exactly the same. Storefronts, the cafe with the old red awning, the barber's pole spinning lazily. But something inside me had shifted. A slow-turning gear had clicked into place. I stopped by the florist on the way home and bought a bundle of lavender and white lilies, Elisa's favorites. I didn't go to a grave. She didn't have one. Just the lake. So I drove to the cabin, changed into clean clothes, and walked down to the dock. The sun was starting to dip behind the pines, gold and warm, casting the water in light that shimmered like memory. I knelt at the edge, let the flowers rest on the surface. They floated for a few seconds, then drifted outward, caught by the gentle pull of the current. I whispered, "It's done, Elise. The place is yours. Forever." And for the first time since she passed, I felt like I'd actually done something right. I didn't expect to be applauded. I didn't care about being understood. This wasn't about making peace with Ethan. It was about preserving something that meant more than inheritance, more than legacy. It was about love. The real kind. The kind that stays behind, not in bloodlines, but in the places we protect. The call came 2 weeks later. I was out back trimming the hedges Elise had shaped with such obsessive precision that the neighbors used to joke she'd missed her calling as a landscaper. She used to hum while she clipped, always off-key but always smiling. I kept the same pattern she left behind, each corner curved just the way she liked. The phone rang in my shirt pocket. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was ragged. Thinner than usual. Something about it sounded different, not performative, not polished. Raw. "Yes," I said, without offering anything else. He hesitated. I could hear him breathing, like he was trying to choose the version of himself he wanted me to hear. "I need help," he said finally. I didn't respond. Just stood there with the clippers in one hand, the other tightening into a fist inside my pocket. "It's bad," he continued. "The startup, Lily's app thing, it collapsed. Investors pulled out. Her dad, he pulled everything. Said it was too risky to keep going. Well, I'm screwed." I looked out over the lake. The water was calm today, barely moving. It had been a dry week. No wind, no storms. Just silence and sky. "She left?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "She said she needed space. Clarity. I'm staying with a friend. Everything's gone. The condo, the equity. My credit's shot. I've been applying for jobs, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. I waited. "You were right," he said. Quietly. About a lot of things. I let that hang for a moment. Then, you called for a reason, Ethan. Say it. I need a loan, he said. Just to stabilize things. Just until I find something. Please. There it was. Always the ask. Always the hand out. I turned away from the hedge and walked slowly toward the porch. My knees ached. The sun pressed against the back of my neck. I thought about Elisa's notebook, still tucked in the drawer of her desk. Page after page of all we gave him. Every dollar marked with a little heart. Do you remember when you were 10, I said, and you swam too far out on the lake? He was silent. You panicked halfway back. Started flailing. Screaming. I ran in and pulled you back to shore. I sat on the porch step. You threw up on the sand and cried into your mother's chest for an hour. Next day, you went back in. I watched from the shore, ready to jump in again. But you made it that time. What's your point? He asked. My point, I said slowly, is that I pulled you out once. But if I kept doing it every time, you'd have never learned how to swim. He was quiet again. I could hear traffic in the background, faint voices. City noise. Everything this place wasn't. I can't keep rescuing a man who never learned to swim, I said. Especially when he spent years acting like he didn't need a life jacket. You're my father, he snapped. You're supposed to be there. I was, I said. Every time. His voice cracked. This isn't the time to make a point. No, I said. This is exactly the time. The line went so quiet I thought he'd hung up. Then, softly, so that's it. You're just cutting me off. I looked out at the lake again. A pair of ducks glided past, perfectly in sync. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm setting you free. He laughed, bitter and short. Wow. You really think this makes you the noble one, huh? No, I said. But I know it makes me honest. He exhaled hard through the phone. You know what, forget it. I'll figure it out without you. Like I always had to. That's the first true thing you've said today, I replied. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a while, phone in my lap, the warmth of the wood seeping into my back. My hands were steady. No shaking. No regret. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in denying your child something he desperately needs. But this wasn't punishment. It was clarity. Ethan had grown up thinking safety was always just a phone call away. A lifeline waiting to be thrown from shore. What he never saw, what Elise and I never told him, was how many times we nearly drowned ourselves trying to hold him up. Love isn't a blank check. It's a contract. And he'd broken his side of it years ago. I stood slowly, joints popping, and went back to the hedge. Picked up the clippers. The sunlight had shifted. The shadows stretched longer across the lawn. There were things left to tend to. Things that still grew, still mattered. Let Ethan chase clarity. I had found mine. It was early March when he came back. The snow had mostly melted by then, leaving the ground soggy, uneven, and reluctant to warm. The air carried that strange in-between smell, earth and rot, sap and thaw. Spring was only whispering from the shadows, not brave enough to show herself yet. The trees stood like skeletons, tall and bare, waiting. I was boiling water in the kitchen, about to make tea the same way Elise used to, plain, steeped too long, always in her chipped blue mug. I'd only just set the kettle on when I heard the sound, tires crunching gravel. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just steady. I moved to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. Ethan's car. Not the sleek black thing he used to drive when he thought the world was his business card. This one was dull blue with a dent in the rear fender, rust along the wheel well, and a passenger door that didn't look like it opened anymore. He didn't get out right away. He sat there in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel like he needed to convince himself this was something he should be doing. After a minute, he opened the door, stepped out, and looked up at the cabin. Like he didn't recognize it. Or maybe like he didn't think it would still recognize him. He walked up to the porch slowly. No duffel bag. No confident swagger. Just an old coat, faded jeans, and boots covered in the muddy teeth of the road. I met him at the door. "Hey," he said. I didn't come to ask for anything. My hand stayed on the doorknob. "All right." He hesitated, glanced at the porch swing. "I just wanted to sit for a bit." I opened the door wider and stepped aside. He nodded once, then stepped in. The cabin seemed to shrink with him inside, like it didn't know how to hold his presence anymore. The last time he stood here, he came with plans and buzzwords. Now, he barely looked around. Just moved slowly, cautiously, like a man walking through memory. I poured 2 mugs of tea. Mine in Elisa's chipped blue mug. His in the clean ceramic one, still no chips, still unclaimed. We sat on the porch swing, 2 men and a quiet that stretched like the lake, deep, reflective, full of things we hadn't said. He held the tea like it might burn him. "She'd still have this place smelling like rosemary and lemon if she were here," he said eventually. "She liked the lemon oil." He nodded, then stared into his mug. I didn't know how empty it would feel. After Lily left. After everything fell apart. "You know now." "Yeah," he said, then laughed a little. "Too late, maybe." He looked up, and there was no pretense left in him. "I lost everything. The car, the condo, the job. I even tried sleeping in the office for a few nights before the landlord locked me out. Couldn't get anyone to return my calls, not friends, not colleagues. Even Bob changed his number. I didn't respond. Just listened." He took a deep breath. "I've been working at an auto parts store. Minimum wage. Long hours. Not what I'm used to. Maybe that's good." He nodded, then paused. "You know, I used to think I was the smartest guy in the room. Thought ambition meant I'd never have to look back." "You mistook speed for direction," I said. He let out a low whistle. "That's exactly it." He reached into his coat and pulled something out, Elisa's old leather bookmark, the one with the little stitched heart. "Frayed edges, soft from years of use. I found this in a book you gave me when I moved out," he said. "Didn't even realize it was hers until I opened it last week." He placed it on the porch railing like it might break. "She believed in me," he whispered. "Didn't she?" "She did. Even when I didn't. She wrote to me once. Said she hoped I'd become someone who gave more than he took. I didn't understand what that meant. Now I do." The air was still. Even the ducks on the lake had gone quiet. "I'm not asking for anything," he said again. "Not a second chance, not alone. I needed to come back here. To look this place in the face." I looked over at him. And it feels like everything I pretended to be falls apart the moment I sit here. That's called truth." He nodded, and we sat like that, not as father and son, not yet. Just 2 men in borrowed silence. "I'm trying," he said. "Trying isn't failing," I said. "It's just beginning." He smiled faintly. "I don't blame you, you know. For the will. For any of it. I'd have done the same if I were you." "No," I said. "You wouldn't have. But maybe you will one day." He stood. "I should go. You know where the path is." He hesitated. "Would it be all right if I came back sometime?" "No agenda. Just to sit." I looked at the tea mug he hadn't finished. "Next time, bring your own cup." He smiled, just a little. Fair enough. Then he walked down the porch, the same way he came, slow, unsure. A little more human than before. The earth squelched beneath his boots, but he didn't rush. Didn't look back. I stayed on the swing long after he disappeared. 2 mugs sat on the table. Mine half empty. His still full. I left them both there. Sometimes, silence doesn't need an answer. Sometimes, it just needs to be shared. Spring arrived like an apology. Slow, soft-footed, and weeks behind schedule. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with color but with sound, the distant patter of rain on thawed ground, the tentative chirp of a bird testing the air, the sigh of wind brushing through bare branches still waiting to bloom. I woke up one morning to the smell of damp soil and the sight of green pushing through brown. The garden was waking up. Elisa's garden. I stepped outside in boots still caked with last week's mud, carrying a steaming mug of tea and her old kneeling pad. The earth was cool and sticky beneath my fingers, the first weeds daring to show their faces. The lavender had survived the winter. A few sprigs of thyme had made it too. Resilient little bastards. She'd be proud. I spent the next several days pulling out rot, repairing the garden bed frames, and restaining the fence. Her gloves didn't fit quite right, but I wore them anyway, splitting at the seams, threadbare in the palms. She used to joke that the garden talked to her, told her what it needed. Now, it was talking to me. The rose bush I planted in her memory, one of those stubborn bloomers the nursery clerk had recommended, was starting to bud. Dark green leaves, tight little fists of color not ready to open yet. But they would. When they were good and ready. The cabin had settled into a new rhythm. The shutters no longer creaked. The dock stood firm. I fixed the drip in the kitchen sink and patched the roof shingles above the pantry window. The place breathed easier, and so did I. The conservancy paperwork went through without a hitch. The cabin officially belonged to the foundation now, a grief retreat, just as Elise would have wanted. Second Horizon sent a few staffers to assess the space. They walked the property with quiet reverence, noting the garden, the rooms, the fire pit near the lake. "It's perfect," one of them said. "Feels like someone already grieved here." And left room for the next person. The first group arrived in early June. 3 men. All different. One a widower who lost his wife of 40 years to a slow, cruel cancer. One a veteran who hadn't spoken to his brother in over a decade. The last was a young man who simply wrote, "I need silence," on his application. I didn't interfere. I kept to myself, working in the garden, tending the firewood pile, sanding down the canoe rack by the lake. They stayed 4 days. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them sitting by the water, walking the trails Elise once cleared, or standing in the kitchen staring out the same window she used to drink her morning tea in front of. They didn't talk much. But I could feel the shift in them. One evening, just before sunset, the oldest man approached me while I was trimming back the rosemary. "This place," he said, "it heals in ways I can't explain." "She built it that way," I said. "Your wife?" I nodded. "She must have been something. She still is." He bent down, picked up a weed, and tossed it aside without another word. I watched him walk away, his back straight, his shoulders looser than when he'd arrived. That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with my tea and wrote Elise a letter. I'd been doing that every week now. Folding them up and placing them in her old recipe tin. This one read. "Elise. They came. Just like you said they would. One of them cried into the lake and didn't even try to hide it. Another fixed the screen door without telling anyone. The third left a book on the porch swing, poetry. I think you'd like that. I planted new chamomile where the mint used to grow. Still no mint, I promise. The lavender is taller than it's ever been. It's like it knows you're watching." He came back. Not for anything. Just to sit. Didn't stay long. But he looked different. Softer around the edges. I didn't ask questions. Just let him leave something behind, your bookmark. He still remembers you. Maybe more than he admits. The cabin is safe. It's doing what you wanted it to do. Holding people. Softening the ache. Offering silence without judgment. I think this is the first time I've felt peace in your absence instead of pain. Maybe that's what healing really is. Love always. D. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Ethan. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of notebook paper, creased like it had been read and rewritten before he sent it. Dad. I started over. Got a real job, warehouse clerk. Not glamorous. Not impressive. But honest. Every box I lift feels like something real. Something earned. I'm renting a room above a shop. Tiny space. No view. But it's mine. I bought a plant. Basil. Mom would roll her eyes at how proud I am of it. I read her garden journal again. She wrote, "The roots remember what the branches forget." I think I finally understand. She didn't want perfection. She wanted presence. Purpose. I'll come by again, if that's okay. Just to sit. Just to see what still grows. Ethan. I folded the letter and placed it in the recipe tin with the others. Later that afternoon, I planted a second rose bush. Not in her memory. But in hope.